Even better.
Who needs lunch when you're at home, right? Just take a nap instead. So we are live, and everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. It is the end of August. I don't know where the month went. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like the month just flew by. We're excited again to have our team from Heartwork Staffing and our team from Techlahoma joining you today on our monthly webinars focused on jobs, finding jobs, staying in jobs, figuring out what your next step is. So thank you everyone who has joined us today. For those of you who are new, what we like to do is have everyone join us in our Techlahoma Slack channel, and we can put that in the chat. And then from there, join our jobs webinar room so that you can ask questions. We've noticed that probably works a little bit better because a lot of cases, I feel like, and Diana might be able to agree, I feel like every session somebody wants to share a resume for somebody to review. So that's a lot easier to do in Slack than it is to do via Twitch. So again, thank you everybody for joining us today. And we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm Kristen Garcia. I'm a former board member with Techlahoma. We have Diana Barnes, who is a vice president of Techlahoma, and we have DJ Winters, who is a part of the Heartwork staffing team. You can go to the next slide. And just for those of you who may be new, Techlahoma is an organization. It's a nonprofit here in the state of Oklahoma with the mission of advancing Oklahoma's grassroots technology community. We do that through education, through training, through workshops, through networking. There's a whole lot of ways in which everyone is consistently working together to bring up the tech community within the state of Oklahoma. Next. Diana, do you want to talk a little bit about the code of conduct?
Yeah, I know there's a thing that we're supposed to read, but I don't ever remember where it's housed at. So basically, in a nutshell, be awesome to each other. Don't harass, don't be a jerk, don't anything like that. As long as we're just awesome to each other, it'll all be good.
Exactly. Okay, next slide. All right. And I think, kind of with that code of conduct in mind, the value of Techlahoma really is that we try to bring in people at any sort of level. So those of you who are listening today, don't feel like you have to be in a particular spot in your, professional career education, just within the industries to be a part of Techlahoma. You can see that we are inclusive of everybody who basically is just excited to see technology grow in the state. All right. And then the next thing is just how to get involved. Diana, do you want to tell them a little bit about how to get involved?
Yeah, there are several ways, and we're constantly striving to even increase this even more. We have our monthly meetup user groups. Right now, we've got 26 of those that are a mixture of in-person and online. We do highly recommend vaccines and mask wearing. Right now, we have a lot of our community that is immune compromised, so that's something that's very important to all of us, is to keep all of our friends safe. If you are more of a basement dweller like my husband, you are welcome to join us on Slack, or everybody can join us on Slack, but we've got a very active Slack community. We also have 3 conferences each year. We've got the UI UX conference that bounces between Oklahoma City and Tulsa. It actually launched in Tulsa this year, but it's going to be back and forth. We have 200 OK, and that's going to be in the spring usually. We've got 200 OK that's in May, and it's in Tulsa. It's the Tulsa Web Devs Conference. And then in November, we generally have Thunder Plains, which is generally JavaScript or more tech general. But this year, because COVID is exploding, we have decided to postpone it until next year. Then we have networking events. Kristen helps organize the Tech++ networking events in Oklahoma City. We've been attempting to do those in Tulsa, but one, we don't have Kristen, two, COVID. And then we also will collaborate with other groups around the state from time to time. For example, I've been recently working with the Ada Jobs Foundation and trying to get them more involved with Techlahoma. So there's multiple ways. And if you have any questions at all, or you want Techlahoma to get involved with your area, just reach out to me and let me know, and I'll see what we can make happen.
Awesome. Thanks, Diana. Next slide. All right, so we're going to kick off. Today's main focus will be on being a great remote employee. I think after all these announcements, and as we've mentioned, with COVID, that this is a great time to have this discussion. There's a lot more jobs that are opening up as remote positions, which is great. If you're in Oklahoma, I think there's a lot of opportunity to find jobs outside of the state and still reside here. DJ and his team are constantly working with businesses that are now trying to hire remote employees. And so we're really excited to have DJ Winters here to present on how to be like a rock star remote employee, right?
Well, thank you for having me. Yes, as you mentioned, I'm with Hartwig Staffing. I'm an IT recruiter there. I have been in the recruiting industry now for a little over 14 years, all of that in IT and healthcare. And over the last 4.5 years, I've been working remotely, somewhat hybrid, but pretty much 100% remote prior to coming on to Hartwig. I was doing it 100% of the time for about 3.5 years. And as she mentioned, with the pandemic, it has really forced an environment where most of us have a remote work environment, whether that's a hybrid or 100% remote. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today and talk through some of the points of being a remote employee and how to really shine as a remote employee and stay productive and be the best you can be in that role. A little bit about me in addition to that, I'm married, I have 4 kids, I have a dog, and my son has a pet snake, and we actually just added 2 more to the family. I have 2 lion's mane bunnies in our house now. So we'll go ahead and jump into this. First thing that you're going to want to do when you start working remotely, again, whether it's 100% remote or maybe you're just working 2 or 3 days a week remotely, and then the rest of the time you're in a dedicated office building, is you want to have a dedicated workspace. The biggest thing, as you can see here, it's going to keep you organized and functional. Your space should complement the type of work that you're doing. As I've noted here, if you're in a role where you're on the phone pretty much all day, you may want to try to find a space that's nice and quiet, free of distractions. If it's something where it's mainly data entry and you really don't have to take a lot of calls, maybe you enjoy the vibe of a coffee shop or something where there's a little bit of background noise. Kind of like how some of us, when we were in the office, we might use white noise, because we don't like the complete silence. So keeping those things in mind. The other thing too is whenever you choose your space, you don't really want to have to move around a lot. So definitely want to have a backup plan. So for example, in my case, I work from home. That's my workspace. And there have been occasions throughout the pandemic where we've had kids at home quarantining. And so I might have a backup space in mind. That could be that I go to the office a couple of days a week, or maybe I go to another location here in town where it's a nice quiet space for me because I am on the phone a lot throughout the day. So that's kind of my plan B when I have those unexpected scenarios that may disrupt my dedicated workspace. But as often as possible, you don't want to really have to change much. That kind of plays into keeping you organized and functional. If you're moving spaces frequently, then you have a tendency to leave stuff behind or lose something, some documents or what have you. Prime example, I was in the office last week for a meeting, and I left my charging cable to my laptop there. So when I was on a Zoom call with my team the other day, my computer died. And so luckily I can just jump on my phone, and it was an easy transition. But it's just a small example of why you want to minimize the disruptions and have that dedicated workspace where you have everything you need to be fully functional and productive. I noted here some examples of different places you can choose from: home, coffee shop, co-working spaces. Library is probably going to be the best spot if it is just data entry. And if you choose something like that, if you're a loud typer, you might want to get one of those soft keyboards. Don't use a mechanical keyboard like I do, because you will not be in a good space. Check for your background. Once you've kind of looking at, or when you're looking and evaluating your options for a dedicated workspace, you want to look at the background. As you can see where I am right now, yes, I have a window next to me, and I try to keep it where the glare is not coming through the window when I'm on a virtual call like this, or if I'm on the phone, not the phone, but a Teams meeting or a Zoom call with a client or a candidate or something. Typically, I like to keep it, the natural background that it is, but I definitely check to see if there's anything in the background that would be distracting before I go into a call. So you want to kind of, every time you go into a virtual call, you want to look at your background, see what's in view, and make sure it's simple and professional, so that you maintain that consistency from call to call. And then finally, when you are evaluating your workspace, you want to consider your desktop space. For me, I just need a little bit of space on my desktop. I have a very big monitor, but it's functional for me in my space. Maybe you are a graphics person or a video editor or a developer, and you like to work with 3 monitors. You have to consider how much space you're going to need, from desktop space to how much it's going to take up within the room that you're in. The room space that I'm in right now is very small, and I just have a very small desk to work with, but it's functional for me. So think about those things when you're looking at, okay, where do I want to set up my office, my dedicated workspace? What am I going to need for that workspace? How much desktop area am I going to need? Do I want to have multiple monitors? Do I just want to have one monitor? So kind of thinking those things through.
DJ, I wanted to give an example of, you're talking about the background, and I know everyone has a different living environment, so depending on what works good for you. I'm actually in my bedroom, but I have this screen divider that I just cocoon around myself, mostly if I'm on webinars. So then it just helps, like, depending on what is happening, if a dog runs by or something. I noticed this has been something helpful. These can go for anywhere from like $25 to $100, depending on where you find them. But for anyone who's thinking, like, I really don't have the space to create a good background, or I don't know how to figure out how to make it. I mean, I love like your shelving and everything in the background. I always think it's fun to see Diana's arcade machine in the background. So for anyone who's thinking, I can't figure out a good background to have other than doing like the green screen, I really recommend a room divider if you can get one, because then if for some reason, based on your living situation, if you have to move into like the kitchen and you had to work out of that area, could you throw this behind you, and then people don't see necessarily that you're changing where you're at every time, and then that causes a distraction, to your point. And then Kimberly mentioned in Slack that she has used a white noise generator to try to drown out my coworkers, aka I think it's her dogs that she was referring to. But consider that could also be something that you do. Let's see, Eric said a pair of noise canceling headphones has helped as well. So I love that people are kind of sharing some things that they've used as well.
Thanks for sharing that, Eric. I was actually about to just mention that point specifically. Is yes, if you are limited to a space where there could be some background noise disruptions, then that's a good option. to have the noise canceling headphones. I personally have probably 3 or 4 different types of headphones for different occasions. And to the point of Kimberly and her coworkers, I've got a coworker right now, and I've been kind of watching to make sure somebody doesn't come to the door and he starts barking or something. So yes, you have to consider all those things, and forgive me if I have a disruption on my end, but I think we're safe for now.
I was going to throw in really quick, speaking of the arcade cabinet, I have found that having something interesting in the background like that, especially if you're not good at starting conversations, is something that every meeting I'm on, somebody's like, hey, that's a really cool arcade cabinet. Can you tell me more about it? So if you feel like you need something to help get conversation started or something like that, sometimes having something interesting in the background isn't a bad idea to have.
That's a perfect point too, and I'll add just another example to that. If you can see my chair here, I was on a call one time and I noticed somebody had the same exact chair, and that brought up a good talking point to kind of connect with that person on and talk about a little bit about, you know, our love for this type of chair, which I'll talk a bit more about why I chose this chair a little bit later in this conversation, actually. Any other questions or thoughts or comments anybody wants to share or discuss on this topic?
The last thing that was mentioned, people were saying if they went to co-working spaces, coffee shops, etc., that's where the noise canceling was helpful. Or if they were still in an office because they were used to what they had at home, the noise, the white noise just kind of helped them to get things, to focus on things. So that's about it.
Definitely. So before you get started working from your remote workspace, you want to test your capabilities. First thing you want to do is kind of make a checklist of all the types of equipment that you might need, such as a printer, scanner. Do you want a laptop versus a desktop? Or if you're like me, maybe you have both. I typically work mostly from my desktop, mainly because I prefer my large monitor that my laptop won't support. Do you need a webcam? Maybe you want an external microphone. I know on that point specifically, you know, sometimes using my laptop's internal microphone, if I get too far off to this side or too far away from it, then people that I'm communicating with on the other end can't hear me as well. So maybe you want to consider getting an external microphone with a stand that's closer to your mouth while you're talking and can pick up noise better, but still drown out any background noise so that it comes through clearly. We talked a little bit about headsets. Maybe there's certain types of headsets that you want to consider getting. You know, I have several that are Bluetooth, but they have different functionalities, so I use them for different occasions. I have some that are wired, and so it just depends on what your needs and uses would be to consider what type of products you might want along the lines of a headset. I mentioned earlier in the conversation, you know, will you need multiple monitors? Maybe where your dedicated workspace is in your house, and maybe it's a bigger house and your modem doesn't send the signal very well throughout the house. So you might want to consider getting a Wi-Fi extender so that you can get a stronger signal to the part of the home that you may have your space in. Fortunately for me, I'm right here next to my modem, so I don't have any issues from that perspective, but I do have extenders in my house for other purposes. We talked a little bit about the chair that I'm using. So for years, I've been that person that will typically just purchase a cheap functional chair, and within a few months to 6 months, the padding has worn out. It's very uncomfortable. It typically falls apart completely within a year. And eventually it just dawned on me that it doesn't make any sense that I'm not investing in a good chair, since I am working at a computer all day, and then I spend a lot of time in the evenings at a computer as well in my free time. So you might want to consider the type of chair that you're going to be using, and investing in a good quality chair that will last you and be comfortable for your needs. Next thing, once you've made that list of items of what type of equipment you're going to need for your workspace, take it home, get it all set up, you know, especially anything electronic, get it plugged in, configured, and test everything. Ensure that you have everything functional to your needs, to your workspace. What are your day-to-day tasks going to be? Making sure that it's going to work properly for what you're needing to perform from the remote workspace. With that, depending on the type of work you're going to be doing, you're going to want to check your internet connection. We as recruiters, one may think that may not need that much bandwidth for what we do, but quite frequently we're all having multiple tabs open. Maybe we have different like a virtual call up while we're looking at other things on that call, and so that can suck a lot of bandwidth from your internet connection. And especially if you're in the home environment where you've got a spouse or something that's working from home as well, and maybe they are a video editor or a graphics person, and so they're going to need some of that as well. So you have to consider how much bandwidth you're actually going to need to perform your job well. And I would consider it from the perspective of not so much just majority of the time, but at what points would you need the most bandwidth, and then go with that. That way you're always safe no matter what. And you don't drop connections. I can think of several occasions where, as a recruiter, I've had candidates that have been on interviews virtually, because these days, as we're talking about here, most interviews take place virtually. And for whatever reason, something's happened with their internet connection and they drop off the call in the interview. And that's not a good place to be in, especially when you're in an interview. Or if you're pitching something to a client, if you're in sales, don't want to lose that connection. Don't want to have a spotty connection where that communication is not coming through clearly, or heaven forbid, you lose the connection entirely and now you've just lost your presentation. Once you've kind of got a list of all your equipment, you've brought it home, you've tested it all out, you've tested your internet connection, you've determined how much bandwidth you need. Maybe you need to contact your ISP and your internet service provider and upgrade your internet package. Once you've done all that, if you find that you're missing any equipment, or if you're having technical issues with some of that equipment, get in contact with your technical support within your company, or maybe if you're in a smaller firm and you don't have a formal technical support team, check with your colleagues, your coworkers, see if maybe somebody knows how to troubleshoot something and help you out with that issue. Leverage your network. Maybe there's people that are really good with certain types of technologies or equipment, and run through that with them and get everything working functional. If there's a piece of equipment missing that you need, make sure you get it ordered and get it shipped to you, or go to the store and purchase it if you can before you need to actually start working. Could be one final thought. I mentioned Wi-Fi extenders earlier in the conversation. Sometimes there's a little bit of configurations that you have to do with those. And for some, it may be a bit overwhelming to have to figure out how to configure something. So again, get your technical support involved. If you don't have a formal technical support team within your company, leverage your network for those people that are technical, and see if there's someone that can maybe help you get that all set up and configured. Any questions?
I just wanted, mention that we had a couple people give a +1 to Dodesy, mentioning that the Wi-Fi is convenient. It lacks the comparison to being wired. So I like that you're kind of reminding everyone, don't just kind of settle with what you have. See what your options are. Has there been a time that you've said, I need to upgrade, but I shouldn't? But now is that time? There are remote jobs that are offering additional monthly stipends sometimes just to help you get yourself set up, whether that's to upgrade your current internet or to help pay for your cell phone bill. So keep an eye out for those if you're looking into a remote job, to see if that's something that they provide. And sometimes they'll provide something to help get you started, even if it's to purchase the chair that you needed to purchase. Or Eric said that he has a standing desk and he uses a foot massage anti-fatigue mat. So something that helps you moving, that you're going to be comfortable at. I think, we don't think enough about how, if I sit in this chair, or if I'm sitting at the spot for, 2 hours at a time, potentially 8 to 10 hours, depending on what you're doing, is what everything I have set up really what I need? And so I really like this idea of really test what you have and consider that there's probably something that you're going to have to change.
Very much so. And one additional thought along the lines of what we're talking about with internet and whether you go wired or wireless, or if you have the proper bandwidth, as we kind of mentioned here, and as we're doing here on this, more often than not, you're going to be using Zoom, Teams, or Google Hangouts for your virtual calls and conversations. And we've found internally even that some work better for certain members of our team, and then there's some of those applications that don't work so well for whatever reason. And it's kind of strange, but in the end, if you've kind of got the top tier package of internet service that you would need for any peak usage, then you should be fine no matter what uses that you find in that situation. Any other thoughts, comments, suggestions on this point?
Nope.
So once we've got our office space set up, we've got it identified, we've got everything set up. Before we get started, we want to consider what distractions we might have to keep us from being productive. Historically, that's probably the number one thing that has prevented most employers from allowing for remote workspaces, because there's just that concern that productivity is going to drop. Now, I think, statistically, numbers are showing these days, especially with everybody working, remote or hybrid, that actually in a lot of cases productivity is up. And there are various reasons for that we won't go into on this conversation today, but making sure you're considering what distractions might come about. We've touched a little bit on this in previous slides, but number one, most likely you're going to want to have a place that has a door or some sort of separation from any outside distractions. I mentioned that I have kids, so two of my children are not in school yet, and so there are lots of days that they are here while I'm working, and I have a space where I have a door. And on days where maybe my wife has to work as well, or I'm not available to go out with them, and maybe I'm on a call or something, or I have several calls scheduled that day. For us, we found that, just having an in-home daycare provider helps us. She works with the kids while we're working, and so we don't have to worry about them coming into our office space and distracting our work day. A big thing that will be helpful for you as well is to, especially the first week or so, maybe first month, for those that aren't quite accustomed to working from home, monitor and audit your time, whether you do that manually with pen, pencil, and paper, or there's some online tools that you can use to kind of enter in what you're doing at certain times of the day, and then at the end of the day or at the end of the week, or maybe even monthly, you just kind of review where your time usage is and what hours and times of the day that's going to be most effective for you. And from that, figure out your work routine. Again, I mentioned that I've been working remotely for about 4.5 years now. One thing that I found recently that seems to be working well due to some of the changes that the pandemic has brought about for me is, I get up early every day. I know some people don't like to do that. I personally am not naturally that way, but I've found that it helps me stay on task and stay productive and still be able to do some of the things that I need to do personally outside of my work life throughout the day. And so my work routine is basically that I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, make my cup of coffee. I have to have coffee first thing in the morning and a glass of water. And then I spend a little bit of time working out. It helps me with my energy levels. And then around about 7 o'clock, usually I get started with doing some tasks that typically I can't get to or dedicate a lot of time to during the day. And I've found that I get a good hour to 2 hours in the morning, depending on when I actually get up and and get my work out of the way. A nice quiet time where I can stay focused. I have no distractions whatsoever, and I can really hammer out some tasks within an hour or two in that time. And then there may be times, during the day where I'm not at my desk 8 to 5. Maybe I have to leave a couple of days a week to go get the kids from school, or maybe I have to take them to school. And so that's part of figuring out what my work routine is what hours of the day can I dedicate to work, and what hours of the day do I need to set aside to maybe take care of some personal tasks. So kind of figuring that out, because there are going to be some consistencies. Inevitably, there's going to be different disruptions, just like we would have if we're in an office, brick and mortar building. But figuring out that work routine early on will help you get into a rhythm that keeps you productive and maybe even has you performing higher than you ever have before. Along with that, use time blocks. Be realistic, though, about how much time you dedicate to certain tasks. And as I mentioned previously, allow for some of those unexpected delays or occurrences. It's going to happen no matter where you are, whether you're working from home or maybe you're in the office a couple days a week, but you are going to have some unexpected delays or occurrences, and we all have to deal with those, right? So using time blocks. In my profession as a recruiter, as I mentioned, there's lots of times where I mean, every day really, I have a lot of time where I'm on the phone with candidates, with clients, with my team. And so I have time blocks where, for example, typically from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m., I am focusing time around the most important tasks of the day. That could be, helping walk through and presenting offers and negotiating offers. It could be preparing a candidate for an interview, or maybe it's a very important meeting with a client or something. I try to block those times for mornings if at all possible. Obviously, it can't always work out perfectly that way, but that's kind of how I use my time blocks, so that I'm focusing on certain tasks at certain times of the day for 1, 2, or 3 hours, depending on how you want to do that. Typically speaking, time blocks are most effective if you do it in 30-minute to 1-hour increments. So you're not having to switch gears constantly, which can cause you to lose productivity. There's data and statistics out there that show that, if I were to just simply take my eyes off and check an email real quick, that it could literally take you 5 to 10 minutes to reorient and get back onto tasks that you were doing. We don't really realize it in the moments, but sometimes that's what can happen. I kind of alluded to this in the previous point, but focus on the bigger tasks earlier in the day. Most of us tend to have the most energy in the morning after we've woken up, maybe after we've had our cup of coffee, but typically speaking, morning to early afternoon is when we are most alert, most aware, and have the most energy. So trying to focus on that time and energy and effort into the bigger tasks, the more daunting tasks, maybe something that causes you a little bit of anxiety. Tackle those when you have the energy and the willpower to do it. That will build momentum to carry you through the rest of the day, so that when you're in your afternoon or downhill slide of the evening times of closing out your day, then it's easy to just tackle those little tasks, like doing some non-urgent email follow-ups or email communications, or maybe you just need to do a quick check-in with a client or a colleague that didn't need to be done earlier in the day, but just wanted to make sure it got done by the end of the day. So focus on those bigger tasks earlier in the day. Use that energy and that momentum to carry you through to the afternoon into the evening, whenever it is that you shut off for the day from your work tasks. And then finally, make sure you keep a clean workspace. And I don't mean just your desktop, especially if you're working from home. Try to keep it somewhat tidy, so you don't have a tendency I just want to get up and I'm going to go do a load of laundry real quick just to take a little break. Before you know it, you've spent an hour, 2 hours cleaning your house, and that takes away from your workday, obviously. And now you're having to shift time around and refocus, and maybe even spend some nighttime hours or weekend hours to get caught up. So keep that consistency, keep it within your work routine. Work in some of that time to maybe allow yourself, if you've really hammered out some productive hours and accomplished a lot of tasks within a time block, and maybe you've got 15, 20 extra minutes before your next time block begins, sure, take that time to run an errand or something, or maybe you just want to step outside for a minute because you've been tied to the desk all day. So go take a walk, but use that time management effectively so that you stay productive and enjoy the benefits of being in a remote work environment.
We have lots of ideas in
All
our
right.
Slack. So again, if you're not in our Slack channel, I really recommend you join the Techlahoma Slack, and then we're in #jobs-webinar. So a couple of things, people were really sharing a lot of examples of what they used for their time blocking, just to make sure that they are dedicating certain times to what they need to, but also blocking out times for those realistic things that they know are going to come up. Becca recommended the tomato timer if you're doing a Pomodoro technique, which is, I think, now I'm trying to remember, is up 20 minutes.
25 minutes of work, 5 minutes of break.
Thank you.
And you try to stay focused during that time. That's my personal favorite. I use it a lot, and it's made me a lot more productive.
Awesome. So if people haven't heard of that before, I think it's that element of what it takes 15 minutes for you actually to like get focused on what you're doing. And so the idea is if you can get past that 15 minutes and then keep going, and then you need to take that break, then at least you're already in it. Eric mentioned that he's using the Forest app. It helps you to stay away from your smartphone and stay focused on your work. Which kind of led into a discussion about some other techniques that people are utilizing for that. And then let's see, there were some questions, and you might get into this in a little bit, DJ, so just let me know.
Okay.
One was about picking a different chair or trying to separate your personal computer time from your work computer time. So I'm not sure if that's something that you're going to go into more later or not. And then the other one was getting distracted during meetings, mostly being at home. But then as we're on these virtual meetings, we have notifications and everything popping up a lot. And so I know my thing for that has become, I will turn off my email sometimes for particular meetings. I know that's hard for people, but I think we've gotten into this mindset of, I got an email, I need to respond. And primarily not everybody, but I think people who feel like we need to always let people know that we're here. And I think that then gets into probably the ultimate issue of getting rid of the distractions is, if you can't find that balance, you're actually going to end up working so much more from home, and then dreading the fact that you're actually working from home, because now you're putting in so many more hours or odd hours, because all of those distractions have caused you, like you said, to have to make up the time later to finish that project or do something on the weekend. And so, I would be curious to maybe the distraction thing first, and then we can maybe talk about that kind of separation of, work and personal digital life and chairs and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the things you just said. So we actually, as a team, had the discussion around specifically being on a meeting and being distracted by what's going on in our email or, messages on LinkedIn, because that's something that we're on a lot. And so for me, I have to do exactly what you just said. I have to just close it. I close my email. I pretty much just close every application unless there's some question that comes up in that meeting and I need to open something to look at some data, then I'll do that. But I try to keep that all closed out, or at least minimalized. Like, for example, I mentioned that I work from my desktop 99% of the time, and I'm on my laptop for this call. So I'm not tempted to kind of look over here to my right to my screen. I have my monitor just turned off so that my focus is on the conversation at hand right now and what we're discussing. So really it just boils down to, you just have to be honest with yourself. When I mentioned doing that, monitoring your time and auditing your time, that's going to be really helpful to discern also where distractions are popping up, and then to identify ways to overcome those distractions or eliminate them. And so, be mindful of that. Now, you may be like me, where maybe you're okay with, okay, if I spend a little time doing this, even though it's not a part of my planned time block, I've got some time this evening and I feel, like I can accomplish that. Or maybe I'll put this to the side, some project that's caught my eye, the shiny object. And I'm like, okay, I can't do that right now, but I'm going to dedicate some time this weekend to doing that. Transitioning to what was discussed about how do you separate work computer time from personal computer time. Again, it's very much similar to what I was just saying. In my personal opinion, is don't have anything accessible to you in those moments or those times. Make sure that whatever you have on your screen at that moment that you're working is focused all around work. Like, I know historically, even before the remote world we lived in, there were statistics and studies showing that social media was a big productivity knocker, for lack of better words. And so a lot of employers started putting filters in on their systems to where employees couldn't have access to those social media sites because they were spending too much time on them. So now you're kind of your own, I don't want to say boss, but kind of in a way you are if you're working remotely. And, you have to be honest with yourself and saying, okay, am I spending too much time on social media during the day? Should I even be taking those breaks? Because, I might tell myself, oh, I'll just give myself 5 minutes. And then an hour later, you're still there and you're like, oh gosh, I got to get back to work. If you find yourself doing that, be honest with yourself and don't allow social media time during the day or during your work hours, whatever those may be. It all comes down to when you are working remotely, it's really integrity. Being honest with yourself about where your weaknesses are and figuring out how to overcome those and keep those things at bay. Any other comments or questions that have come up?
And so I guess to add to the distractions, and then I know we talked about the social media, what have you noticed or observed about how to just keep things separate? I know Kimberly was the one who asked about the computer time, and I struggled with that too for a while. I think, and maybe it's a difference of remote work if you have a device that is a work device, and then if you work for yourself and you have your own device that is the everything device. I found myself at a point where I needed to figure out, okay, when is it that I'm using this device for this purpose and this for this other purpose? She was mentioning one thing, or somebody mentioned something they heard was, if you only have one device, do you change the wallpaper? Maybe you have a different user account if it's going to be personal things that you're going to do, so that it just appears different, as opposed to, I don't want to be on this one device all day long. So I don't know if you've heard of people run into that, just because, everything's online now, right? So you're probably going to have to go and respond to personal emails, or maybe I have Techlahoma work, but I have my job. And so I don't know if you have any thoughts.
No, I haven't really ran into that a lot as far as personally, or just hearing about, like, through my communications with candidates that I work with, or just generally people that are in my network. But those are all valid points too. For example, you mentioned multiple devices. I kind of mentioned I prefer my home desktop, even though I have a work issued laptop. And my thing is, primarily, I just use my laptop for virtual calls like this, mainly because it has a webcam on it already, and I just don't want to buy one for my desktop, even though I could get one through my work if I wanted to. It's been offered to me, but this works functionally for me, and so I just haven't decided to do that. As far as you mentioned, like, the personalization of your home device versus your work device. I think really the main question that has to be asked is, is it professional? Like you said, if you've got a certain type of wallpaper or something on your home device, and there's concern that maybe, that can be seen or something. I'm not sure, but, just consider the question, is it professional? And more than likely, you can arrive at the answer pretty easily from that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But there are also online monitoring tools that can kind of circling back to what I was saying earlier, that's not directly answering the question you were just asking, but that can kind of lock down certain programs for you so that if you are tempted to get on social media or something, that you won't have access to it at certain times of the day.
Well, and Eric mentioned block site, because it's in Kimberly saying hers is the opposite. She's distracted by work when she's not supposed to be working. So Eric recommended block site. He said you could block GitHub or other things that are work focused so that you stay off of it. So I love that we're running into this reverse issue just as much. When I worked from home at a previous organization, we actually had like a voice over IP phone and our device, and I unplugged the phone every night and shut everything down. So that corner was basically a dark corner, because I would tell myself like, no, I need to turn it off, because I worked with students all over the United States. So there was a high likelihood somebody would call me at 10 at night, because it was just the evening for them. So I think there's an element of we have to unplug things physically sometimes to get ourselves to say like, stop, stop doing that.
Very much so. And yes, that is one thing I would definitely say is just that is, if you can't physically unplug something, or you don't want to turn off notifications on your mobile device, for example, which is the main distraction that we have, we're not at our desk anymore, but we still have our mobile device that still has pretty much all the same data feeds that our laptop or desktop does. And we don't want to turn those notifications off because we're afraid we'll have to forget turning them on or something. Then, yes, just learn to just ignore those things when it's past your time, unless it's something super urgent, or just put it down for the evening. And maybe you do have a separate device that you get onto that's not connected to your work, for lack of better words, data feeds. Any other thoughts or comments?
A couple of other people are just mentioning some things that they have had to do when they need to check out, whether it's deleting. Becca says she deleted her Outlook app on her phone when she went on her honeymoon to just not go and look at it. And I think there's an element of being okay, and maybe that's the psychological element of this, is being okay to turn things off and to focus on what you need to focus on, both professionally and personally. And that's a big part of remote work, is figuring out how to make that difference without feeling like, okay, my life is now my work. And so maybe it's even, this is a support group within the Slack for people to say it's okay for you to do that. And maybe to have that communication with your staff and your teams, making sure to tell them, this is how I will do things during these hours, because I need to get other things done. I don't have any children, so I'm not having to worry about the additional element of my life. But for other people, that's something to consider. Like, at what cost are you not focusing on personal things because you've let work creep into everything else?
Great transition point. So with that in mind, one of the things I mentioned here in this slide, aside from the main topic here, is, okay, now let's do the work. Let's get to work now. But communicating with your team and your leadership, okay? And I'll just use what we were just talking about, even though it's not my first bullet point here, to bring that to where we're going here, is be sure and have those conversations with your team and your leadership about, and try to understand what is expected. For example, we as an office, our leadership really encourages us to, not feel like we have to be available 24/7, but with the understanding that there might be some urgent things that need to be taken care of. So just be mindful of those things, but, disconnect when your day's done. Disconnect, unless it's your personal choice if you want to spend more time working, but is not expected of you. And so have those conversations with your leadership and your team about what would be expected of me. If there would be some type of required after hours expectations or communications, what would those be? Define those with your team and your leadership. So kind of parlaying into this first point is, building trust with your team and your leadership is communication with them. Obviously continuing to perform at the level that you had been, if it's with the same company, or maybe this is a new job for you and it's your first remote role. So you want to, really focus on your performance, and everything we've talked about leading up to this point should set you up for success in performing well. But the biggest thing once you start the work and you start the role is communication. Now you're not in an office anymore where everybody's sitting around you all the time, or you have easy access to your leadership or your team where you can just go talk to them real quick. So you have to take the initiative to reach out to those individuals and build those channels of communication and build those relationships and establish rapport with them. I'll give you an example. When I first started working 100% remote a few years back, one of the things I noticed right off is that there wasn't like this period of, hey, here's this person, here's what they do, and let's all get on a call and just introduce the new guy. No, it was like you start and all of a sudden these people just start messaging you on Teams and just telling you what they need or what they want from you. And you're like, well, who are you? What do you do? Never talked to you before. So what I would do is I would just reach out to those individuals and I'd say, hey, when do you have a free moment to chat? I'd just like to get acquainted and get better understanding of kind of what your role is within the organization, and share a little bit with you about what I understand I'm going to be doing going forward, and how would we be able to collaborate on certain tasks or projects. So that's the best way to do it, is just take that initiative, discuss those things with the people in your company, and be sure and over communicate in your first few weeks. Don't kind of sit back and just think, oh, well, somebody will come to me if I need to know something. Again, that company I worked in, it was the total opposite. They expected you to come to them if you needed something, or if you had questions about something, or you weren't sure about something. And so it was a big no-no if you got caught just sitting back waiting for somebody to point out something about, oh, you should have been doing this, or you should have been doing that. So take that initiative, ask questions, over communicate with your team, reach out to people across other teams and establish relationships, at least some level of rapport with them. And ultimately, all that feeds into how you create the culture of the organization when most, if not all, of the staff within that organization are working remotely. That's how you build your culture, and you contribute to that more so than ever when you're working remotely, because you have to have that initiative and that know-how to establish those relationships and reach out with those individuals. And then finally, be accountable by tracking your activity, building reports, logging your progress. More so than ever, especially in a remote workforce, more than likely your employer is going to have some type of metrics, activities, KPIs, commonly used terms in traditional sales roles, but you hear it more and more in just about any role these days. And then just be available and consistent in what you're doing. The consistency plays into pretty much every slide that we've talked about here. Setting yourself up for success, and then finally sharing that success with your team. Don't be afraid to, jump out there and say, hey, here's a big accomplishment I had personally on a certain task this week. We as an office here at Hartwig, we're constantly, sharing with one another certain successes that we have throughout the day. It's not always just the success of, some revenue generating activity. It's just something as simple as, oh, hey, I had a great conversation with someone today, and this is what I learned from them, and this is what I learned about them. That's a success. That's stuff that's great that you want to share with your team, and it builds that culture of the organization. Any questions there?
I'll say we have about 4 minutes left, so I want to make sure that you go through any remaining slides that you have. We're having some great chats in the Slack, so we can continue those after.
That's my final slide, so I kind of wanted to reserve that last few minutes for any questions there.
Well, good. Well, it doesn't look like we have any questions. We have a lot of additional tips. Eric said, I found it helpful to lay out expectations for how urgency of communication is handled by platform. Generally, if it's really that urgent, you need to call me. If you don't call, it can wait until it fits my schedule. And I think that's the expectation element of things. I feel like is really important, communicating that to people to prevent frustrations. I know when you're working remotely, it's not as easy to just go grab somebody. So, if you use a system where you can see each other's calendars, I feel like that's really important. Put time on people's calendars to have conversations so you don't also assume that they're available and then cause distraction for them as well. So I think the more we can probably have everyone just be aware of how to connect at the right time with individuals, it'll be really helpful. And then Diana mentioned something that I do as well, using Google Voice for work specific items. I promote my Google Voice number just because my personal cell phone is an out of area code number. So I figure at least I have a 405 number that if people call that and it's after hours, is it really an emergency? It might just be that they happen to call me. Diana, do you have any other items you saw in the chat or that you'd like to share?
I don't see anything else in the chat. The only thing I was going to say is that you don't have to reply to everything. You don't have to have notifications for everything. And it's going to be uncomfortable at first when you turn all of that off, but you'll end up being very, very thankful for it in the end, and you will eventually get comfortable with it.
I think you also mentioned in this last slide about the sharing the successes. And I think that if you're an extroverted person working remotely, which I was for about 5 years, I feel like if that's your personality, find ways to connect with the team in the way that makes most sense. Maybe offer to your team manager or lead or supervisor that you would like to help with things like that. Because just because you're a team leader doesn't mean that you're an extrovert. And so the more people can help those, I would help people plan, Halloween costume Zooms or whatever it might be, just something different to get people out there. And then, hey, how can we get people successes and send a weekly email or a monthly email letting people know the good things people are doing. If you have those skills and abilities and you're thinking it would be nice if this happened, then offer to do that for your team. Don't sit there and wait for it.
Yes, very much so. A couple of other last minute thoughts here. Sharing successes, a tool that we use internally where more commonly than not we share the bigs and little successes is Marco Polo. We send Marco Polos to each other about little successes and big successes throughout the day. It could be for the whole office or maybe it's just for your team, but that's a good way to communicate that when those happen.
That's a cool way of just like a quick communication. I really like that.
Yeah. And then one last little funny one. If you're like me, when I very first started working remotely, again, using that example of, having people that were messaging me, not knowing them, never having had a real conversation with them, let alone seeing their faces, it's hard to take the tone of the message. And so one thing I started doing with people that I hadn't really communicated a lot with and hadn't had a chance to have a conversation with, whether it was virtual or over the phone or in person, because we'd have quarterly meetings where we got FaceTime with people, but that was really just a handful of times a year. I started using emojis to show the tone of my message. so people would understand, that, hey, I'm just trying to be helpful, or I'm just trying to, whatever the case may be. And because I tend to be kind of short and to the point in my written messages, and I don't want it to come across as, I don't want to be bothered. I don't want to be helpful. And so I just found that, using emotions through emojis helped a lot.
Well, and I think that adds to the element of when you work remote, don't assume what
Yes.
is happening with your team. And if you can do a fun message, if you can do a quick call, you could probably save some stress later as a result. Because, again, if this was about how to be a good remote employee, that involves your participation and getting to know your team to be effective in your job. That doesn't mean everyone's going to be friends, but if it's a better way to be successful in your job and complete your tasks, then I think that's a lot of what DJ was presenting, is just how to get to that point. So thank you so much, DJ. We appreciate your time. We're 2 minutes past the hour. So thank you, everyone who's joined us today. Again, feel free to subscribe if you can to the Techlahoma Twitch channel. You can use your Amazon Prime account to give us a free subscribe to help support the events. Keep an eye out for more virtual events via Meetup. We're always looking for guest speakers. And if maybe you're not the speaker, but you have an awesome team member who you work remotely with who could be a great speaker for one of our virtual meetups, please invite them to get involved. Though this is Oklahoma based, we have a lot of people who have been joining us from elsewhere because of the fact that we're all kind of in this virtual world at the moment. So everyone be safe, have a great rest of the week, and stay connected in Slack and keep providing information and asking questions. Thank you, DJ.
Everyone.
Thanks, everyone.